This is the meeting, the July 24th meeting of the Budget Task Force, Westford, Massachusetts Budget Task Force. And we are going to, tonight our purpose is to have a public listening session and also just create a video documented, shareable sort of check-in with the public about how this process is working and what we're doing. My name's Tom Clay. I'm going to start off just very briefly, and then you'll see a number of us sort of talk about different sections of this report as it comes together. Welcome for those physically here in the audience. It's excellent to see you here. And I think we've got some folks online too, so thank you for joining online. And I guess Dan will be answering your questions, or helping to make sure if you have a question that it gets.
I think Chris is monitoring online, so.
You're monitoring online, okay.
Yeah.
Great, so that's covered. So real quick, we're going to cover in some detail basically why we're doing this in the first place. But briefly, in this fiscal year, we're seeing a lot of challenges where we're seeing expenses for various items move at a faster than historic rate. So typically every year it's always tough to make budget trade-offs, but we've got a good track record of staying within the Prop 2.5 increase that's allowed under statute. This year, though, we're concerned that there's a number of things coming up which are significant dollar expenses that we will not be able to accommodate in the business as usual way that we've done budgeting. So we've convened the Select Board, the Finance Committee, and the School Committee have convened this special body, the Budget Task Force, with the goal of studying carefully what other communities have done, what ideas might be for finding efficiencies, where we might pursue additional revenue sources. So we'll go into that together as we walk through this tonight. The purpose of tonight's meeting is really to share our outline with you and get input from you about sort of the work product itself. So there will be a number of times, including our annual retreat at Kimball's and in other public meetings, where we actually share a lot of the research and the data that we've been collecting, the team's been creating. Tonight we're really here, though, just to share the outline of the work and give kind of a brief overview of how we're approaching the problem, who we're benchmarking against, what kind of benchmarking we're doing, what other ideas we're exploring for alternative revenue, really with the idea of sharing kind of our approach. We've been at this now for, I don't know, 10 weeks or some amount of time. We've made a huge amount of progress, and we've done enough that we want to check in and make sure we're directionally going the direction that the public would like us to go. Also, this is a great time, if you have any questions tonight that you think community members are going to have, it's a great chance just to share those questions with us. We can include those in the report. We probably won't answer them tonight. I guess we might in some cases, but we won't necessarily answer them tonight. But we can take those and make them part of the report that we're creating so that your question gets a good answer and everyone in the community can benefit from the thoughts that you've had. So that's what we're doing tonight, and we'll be here as long as you'd like to stay. We think it's going to take about an hour and a half, but it might take a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on where things go. Let's go ahead and introduce the task force members. I'll go first, since I'm already talking. So I'm Tom Clay. I'm the chair of the Select Board here in Westford. And maybe Jenny, do you want to start?
Okay, my name is Jenny Ling. I'm the director of finance for school.
I'm Dan O'Donnell. I'm the finance director for the town.
I'm Kristen Lass. I'm the town manager for the town.
I'm Valerie Young, chair of the school committee.
Amy Lundquist, I'm a resident.
Shayna Farnsworth, I'm a resident.
Erica Cole, I'm a resident.
Vibhu Jain, I'm a resident.
And with us online, I think, is Christina. Christina Green is the chair of the Finance Committee, so lots of firepower here on the Budget Task Force. And I think Chris Chu, who's a school superintendent, is also an active member of this group. He's on vacation, well-earned vacation, so he will not be joining us from a cruise in Italy. So that's a wise choice. And I think that's everybody. And are you managing the slides? You are. Janice, great. So Valerie, if you could take us through the charge.
Yep, so when a committee is created, the select board or the appointing authority sets out a charge. So the budget task force charge is a little wordy and it's up there, but basically our goal is to look at how to make the budget for the next couple of years more sustainable. And there's a lot of things we're covering that are listed out here, including alternative revenue sources, overrides and exclusions under Prop 2.5, cuts in service, contracting out of services, as well as other measures. And we're hoping that we can get to a good place to be able to make some recommendations before the FY '25 budget process would start, which is around October. So,
Also, the policy-making choice about which combination of additional revenue and service cuts that will make the budget will be of the various boards that we talked about before. It'll be the Finance Committee, Select Board, School Committee. So this group is really presenting options or trying to size the different puzzle pieces that might go into this final budget. So we're happy to receive any questions or input about policy concerns you might have or about priorities you have. We'll relay those to the appropriate boards, but we won't be making the decision about what's in or out of the budget. That'll be the elected committees that will do that. And I think we're handing over to Dan for the next couple of slides.
All right, we have a website for the task force. It's under the boards and committees on the town's main website. Here you can find video recordings of our meetings, minutes, and other related documents. There's also a Google form on here that Valerie created where the public may leave feedback. Responses are anonymous unless you choose to leave your email address to be contacted for any follow-up information. I'm happy to report that so far we've gotten 55 entries in there. So it's been very successful so far. So please check it out. Then here, as Tom was mentioning, we do have several budget challenges this year that are beyond business as usual. In a given year, Westford has approximately $3 million in new revenue, give or take, to address increased costs from year to year. And so next to each line that we're listing here, we're kind of given a ballpark potential increase that aren't all flushed out yet, but this is our first estimate to this process. So I'm going to step through these really quickly. We have a new solid waste and recycling contract that's coming due to start FY25. Acme Waste, who's been our solid waste hauler for many years, is no longer going to provide that service. They didn't bid on it. So we're expecting a substantial increase to switch to another vendor. We should be reviewing this contract in August with the Select Board, and there'll be a presentation on that. So next we have our energy costs, which are namely the natural gas and electricity increases. The Select Board already did approve new contracts. So for natural gas, it's starting on March 1st, 2024, and it's a 70% increase to the supply cost for the natural gas. For the electricity, that contract is starting on December 1st, 2024, and that's a 40% increase. So the one good thing is that these are starting in the middle of a fiscal year, so they're kind of spreading out the increases over 2 years, but there's still going to be substantial cost increase to the operating budgets. And then we have our town and school collectively bargained contracts, which the schools are currently in negotiations with most of their largest unions, including the teachers, coordinators, team leaders, nurses, and teaching assistants. For the town, all the contracts are settled through FY25 with the exception of the firefighters, and that expires at the end of FY24. So we have to provide room for projected increases for those contracts. Let's see, non-union salaries. The town's very conscious about retaining employees and attracting new talent when necessary, so we want to make sure we're paying market wages. So we do an analysis each year that actually ensures that we're paying reasonable amounts for our non-union employees. And we have our health insurance costs. So about 2 years ago, we began to, actually it's about 15 months ago, we had the health insurance trust begin. And so we're partially self-insured, which means that as we incur claims up to a certain amount, basically $125,000, we're responsible for those expenses. So since we started all right, but the claims have really picked up in the last 6 months or so. Our stop-loss insurance increased from $110,000 per month to $173,000 per month, just based on the utilization that we're seeing. So we have contacted our health insurance broker, which is Hub Inc., and they're working on analysis for us to kind of use for these purposes. And the Health Insurance Trust, they meet often, and they'll be having meetings that are posted that we'll be able to discuss this information with them and the public. So now we're on to some school expenses. We do have the school bus contract expiring after 5 years. So in other communities, we've seen increases up to 11% there. The special education fleet includes 18 vans, and all the leases were originally signed over 15 years ago, so we need to start signing new leases to get some newer vehicles in to begin replacing those older ones. And then this was a topic that we were talking about last year, but the special education private school tuitions are going up 14% in FY '24. Now, this is something we were discussing but wasn't known at the time we passed the FY '24 budget. So the schools are planning on using one-time funds this fiscal year to pay for that increase, but next year we do have to work that into the budget. So that's quite the sizable increase as well. Then, if you all remember, we did have the school feasibility study that was presented, what was it, like 2 months ago, Jenny, a month ago?
So probably 3 months ago.
3 months ago?
Yeah, we
So-
completed a feasibility study.
Yeah, so it had a lot of recommendations from the consultant that need to be gone through, but the schools did already file a statement of interest with the MSBA for the Robinson School to begin that process to, is it either fix or replace the school?
Yes.
One of the two options, so there'll be a major expense coming our way. And then, of course, we'll have other expenses throughout the process that may come up that we're just not aware of yet. So we're just in the beginning stages of this process. The final report will have more detailed information on each of these line items and a budget range, so we can really dive into what the impact is for each of these budget challenges.
Yeah, so like Dan says, if these went by quick, well, first two things. Just if you're familiar with Prop 2.5, Prop 2.5 says that the levy that we assess in terms of property taxes can go up by 2.5% a year. In a low inflation environment where things are stable, we've been able to make that work and continue to provide services, as best we can, always with some tough trade-offs. But if you look at all of these added up together, and you listen to some of the percentages that Dan was sharing, like 14% on special education, outplacement tuitions, or the energy costs, which are jumping by more than 50% in some cases, that's going to take you way beyond what can normally fit in a Prop 2.5 increase type environment. So that's why we're having these conversations now in advance of budgeting. And Dan mentioned it a little bit already. If these seem like new things that you're hearing about for the first time, you'd like to get more detail, the report will go into a fair amount of detail, like half page, maybe more for each of these, where we'll go into exactly what it is, under what statute it's created, if that's relevant. In some cases, with the collective bargaining units, we'll give lots of benchmark data that we've collected for the various bargaining units that we are currently in negotiation with. So you'll have access to lots of detail on each of these when you actually take a look at the report. But maybe just while we're on this, I don't know if anyone either online or here in the room has any feedback or ideas of how you'd like to see us discuss these budget challenges. If there's any approach that you think would be particularly valuable. We'll come back at the end and have a chance for everyone to share ideas, so you don't have to share right now, but we'd be really interested in ideas you have for how we might better communicate some of these budget challenge issues, but really everything we're going to talk about tonight. Anything from the rest of the committee for Dan before we move to the next? You nailed it? Okay. That's great. Nothing so far online. So why don't we move to the next slide then? I think Shanna's going to take us through this.
That's me. New revenue opportunities. So I think as Tom touched upon, one of the tasks of our committee, and especially the subcommittee that I've been working on, has involved looking at all the possibilities of both new revenue sources for the town, but also potential areas we can increase existing revenue opportunities. This will go hand in hand to what our counterparts in the efficiencies committee is looking at too, as to whether or not there may be some other budgetary efficiencies within the departments that we could look at as well. For each of the opportunities we have listed here, we've been researching the viability of the opportunity, the expected revenue outcomes, comparing to benchmark communities where it's applicable, and looking at a lot of the historical data that attributes to these different factors. As mentioned, I think our budget and efficiency subcommittee has been doing a great job researching the budgets of the other communities, the benchmark communities, and trying to uncover some other efficiency areas. And I think that will lead our revenue group to some more avenues to pursue as we dig into those budgets a little bit more. As you can see on the slide here, this is the current list of opportunities and possibilities that we've started researching. And that includes town facility rentals and school facility rentals. the sale of town-owned property and real estate, a composting program, any fee increases that would include like licenses and permits that we're doing for both the business community and also for the residents. We're looking into a cannabis excise tax and revisiting the possibility of retail cannabis stores. Pay-as-you-use trash fees to see if there's a way we might be able to help offset some of the waste changes that will be happening with that contract. Short-term rental fees. We're also looking at split tax rate. For those that aren't aware of what that is, that would be if the town had a separate tax rate for commercial versus residential properties. So we've looked a little bit into that again. That is something that the select board had looked at in the past. A meals tax increase, real estate transfer fees. This is another interesting one that we've been looking at that Tom's been researching mostly, but it would be a percentage fee when a real estate is bought or sold. That would be paid potentially by a buyer or seller. So we're looking at the viability of that option. Room occupancy fees, cell tower rentals, school activity fees, school bus transportation fees, the possibility of solar panel fields. We're looking into naming bylaw fees, which would be having naming rights that could be purchased for certain properties or certain types of facilities. Is there a way to expand the property tax work-off program? The overall economic development within the town, any kind of new growth. Another really interesting one, I think, is the MBTA multifamily zoning requirement. I know the planning board had a meeting about this, I think, at the beginning of last week to discuss this a little bit more at the town. But this is a new statewide law that requires us to zone for multifamily properties because Westford is a abutting MBTA community based on our proximity to the Acton and Littleton commuter rail stations. So this is a real opportunity where we have to zone for this, but we could zone it in a way that potentially could cause some more immediate economic impact. And then we'll have some discussion just explaining about a Proposition 2.5 override and what that might look like as well. We have recently also added to this list looking at ambulance fees to see if that might be an area where we could increase revenue. That came from a suggestion of our benchmarking subcommittee and the work that they were doing. And I think tonight, in general, our subcommittee on revenue is really hoping that maybe the community will have some additional ideas and additional things that we could research and anything that maybe we missed on this list that we could continue to look into.
So Shannon's been doing an enormous amount of work on this, and for each one, we're trying to give some sort of estimate what the impact might be. So you can pick something like, composting is an example. If we had a successful composting program with high participation, we could divert a lot of waste, so we'd be paying a lot less tonnage for waste disposal. So we're trying to quantify that and sort of explain how the benefit might work, so that when you look at all these together, you'll have a good sense of what is the financial impact each of these might have. Some of them are big, some of them are small. Some of them are just really good ideas we should just do anyway, even though they're not huge revenue opportunities. So I'm at least finding a lot of interesting ideas just going through and looking what other communities are doing. I think it just generates a lot of ideas that we can pick up on. Diane, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, quick one.
I'm sorry, do you mind coming to the mic? I'm sorry. I hate to make you jump up and down, but.
Once again, thank you. Diane Wood, 122 Depot. This is wonderful. But in addition to adding, as you said, Tom, some notes next to it, I think another factor may be the complexity. Are all of these within our own town's control without getting the state in the middle of that, or feds, or any other organization? So I think understanding, it looks good, but when you look at it, right, after more research, you'll find, well, now we have to get the state involved, now we have to get to the feds, now it's going to take 4 years to do that. That's just another data point that might be helpful, that you might have already.
Yep, no, that's a really good point, and we can expand on that. The final report will include a descriptor of what it is, the historical data, like how is it applied to the town in the past, or how could it be applied. We also talk about how you would implement it if we were to do it. What will that look like? Is it a town meeting vote? For in particular, the real estate transfer fees are still something that's being looked at a state level. So that would be one, if we were going to implement it, that would have to come from a state. But we are looking at what does it take and what is the timeline potentially? Is it something, if we increase school bus transportation fees, that would have an immediate impact, right, in that next fiscal year. But if we are looking at economic development, that's 2, 3, 4 years down the road before that impacts. So we'll have some kind of quantification to the best that we can guesstimate of what the timeline for the budget impact to be as well, to the best that we can anyway.
Great, thanks. Any other questions?
Nothing online. I think we'd be clear if you're online and you want to make a comment or a question, just use the raise hand function, as we can't see you in person. So there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions. So keep writing those down, and we'll make that available through the raise hand function if you're online, and we'll call on you as appropriate.
Great. Any other questions for Shannon on that one? Okay. Benchmarking. Who do we agree is fielding this one?
Christina should be.
Oh, okay.
virtual.
Can we,
She's
Christina?
all set.
Can you guys see me?
We can't see you, but
Or
we
hear
can,
me?
we can hear you, yeah. I can see you.
Okay,
I don't know if you can see.
good enough.
Okay,
All right.
we can hear you.
So the benchmarking and efficiency subcommittee started with identifying comparable communities. We started out based on these bullet points on the left side of the screen: the town population, the geographic location, school district performance, those different qualities. The town, and also what the town has used historically. And historically, the town sort of used two lists, one for the schools, one for the town. So the schools list includes what is called the DART districts, and that is a list of towns that the state or the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education sees as districts that are comparable to Westford in terms of student achievement and district demographics. Those, I believe, are the non-bolded. Well, I'm not going to say exactly which ones those are, because I think there's a combination there. This list also includes adjacent communities, and adjacent meaning, geographically adjacent to Westford, to add that component, and a similar per capita income. This school list has been used during the WEA, the Westford Education Association's negotiations, and this is typically what the schools have used in the past. If you look at the town list, for the most part, this list has been used by the town for decades, at least a decade and a half, maybe, again, for union contract negotiations. What the benchmark and efficiency subcommittees decided to do for the town list is we removed Wakefield, which was originally on this list, and the primary reason that we removed it is that it was very difficult to get budget information on Wakefield. We also added Shrewsbury and Franklin because they are comparable demographics, they have comparable per capita income, and we thought we might be able to learn something from them. So these are the two lists that the benchmarking and efficiencies group is using. We decided to stick with using two separate lists because of the history and the time constraints on this committee. We didn't feel we should go and reinvent the wheel and create new comparable lists. So taking these two lists, we gathered budget data from the communities to compare with Westford's budget. We wanted to make sure we had an apples to apples comparison, as we quickly found out if you rely on the state data, and I'm not talking school, I'm talking town at this point, you don't necessarily get an apples to apples comparison because it really depends on how your town is organized. So we we gathered our own data for the towns. For the schools, we did feel that the DESI data was accurate, and we're using that information. This work is still ongoing. We're still gathering information. We're also in the process of reaching out to our department heads to get their insight on any spending differences that we see for the various areas or departments across the budget. If you go to the next slide, please. So the efficiency side. So as we go through and we look at all of these different towns and how they're running their various departments, we're noting differences in the way they do things to see if maybe we can leverage that and implement it in Westford. Here are some of the examples of leveraging technology or using shared services, energy efficiency, maybe centralizing certain processes. And as I said, we are in the process of reaching out to our department heads to get their input on things like that. The next thing that we'll do is we will reach out to a smaller select set of communities to get more details on their programs or their efficiencies, again, to see if we can use them and apply them here in Westford. That's all I have on those, if anyone has anything to add.
Could we flip back one just for a second? Back one slide. There we go. Christina, one thing I just wanted to mention is that, so historically, the schools have used the DART districts provided by DESE, just as you described. It is a change this year that the school committee has now made it a DART plus a geographic adjacent group. So small change from what we've done historically, but very consistent with what other school districts are doing. And in fact, we learned that that's more of a best practice amongst the school districts out there than what we had been doing. So we think we're actually closer to best practice now with this group. And maybe, Christina, just what kinds of insights do you think we might mine in terms of looking at these benchmarks and comparing the communities? And what kinds of things would be interesting that you might discover in the data, just to give people some examples?
So I worked more so comparing on the town side, so I'll give a couple of examples there. What we found is that several communities have a facilities department that's much larger than our facilities department, and that facilities group handles everything from custodial to building repair, maintenance. Sometimes even the utilities are in that budget, so that one central place is looking at all of our buildings across the town. We have yet to really dive a little bit deeper to see if that will get us some economies of scale. Like, can we save if we're doing things across all of our buildings versus each building independently? There's another example of vehicle maintenance being done that way also. Right now, Westford kind of splits out their vehicle maintenance based on which department sort of owns that vehicle. But other towns have a fleet maintenance division, usually in their public works department. They have their own mechanics working on the vehicles. And I assume they are able to save money because they're not sending vehicles out to be repaired. So those are the two biggest ones I can think of.
Thanks, Christina. Those are great. And when we go to questions, this is a great place for people to ask questions. A lot of the online questions we've gotten so far have been questions like, how does Westford spend in this category versus other communities? How is this tracked over time? So we'll make sure all those questions get answered in a thorough way in this report. But if there are questions on your mind about just things you want us to dig into to make sure that we're seeing if there's something important to learn from some other community, or if we're doing something that's off base in Westford, overspending or underspending, that's exactly what this benchmarking group is helping us dig into and understand. Any questions for Christina on those couple? Okay, Erica.
All right, so now I'm just going to take a couple of charts before we get to the forum to talk about how we're distilling all of this information into recommendations. So the items that you see on the left are covering basically what you've just seen. We're reaching out both within Westford and external to Westford in order to garner ideas and best practices. The middle yellow section is focused on two things. We're looking at establishing a range of budgetary impact for each of the items that we are seeing as being either a potential efficiency or a challenge. So for instance, with the challenges, we might say that we have a range, well, I think actually Dan walked through them, but we have a range of potential fiscal impacts, and we also are establishing a most likely budgetary impact. we're forecasting those then for the next 5 years. So, it gets a little bit more nebulous as you go out in time. And then we are also doing the same thing for the efficiencies and the new revenues, where we're establishing what sort of range of impacts could each of these have on our budget. And then we're recognizing the fact that implementing some of these efficiencies or some of these new revenues would have potentially other consequences. For instance, if we were to sell a property, we would no longer have that property. And that could have implications down the road. So we're trying to capture both the quantitative as well as the non-quantitative aspects of each of our challenges and opportunities in that section. Once we have all that, we're going on to the red section, where we're establishing what are the range of budget gaps that we are likely to encounter in the next 5 years. And we're going to look at those, where's the mean and what is the dispersion of those budget gaps, and what can we do with those efficiencies and new revenues to address those budget gaps. And that's where the real discussions happen. That's where we'll be really, sitting down and having the difficult discussions, both with you and internally, about what sort of recommendations we should have. We were charged with coming up with scenarios. So those scenarios really are looking at what can we do to address the budget challenges, because we have no control, obviously, over the challenges themselves. So you can see on the bottom, we're talking about doing the research and information first, and then that's going to drive our analysis and decisions. So you can go on. Coming out of the whole effort will be two things. We will have a report and we will have a presentation to the select board. The report is going to be what you see here. We'll have an introduction. We'll discuss the methodology that I just went over with you. We'll talk about status quo, where are we, and then our analysis and what we did, how we analyzed it, what conclusions we drew, and how those conclusions formed our recommendations. All of that will get put into pretty prose, put into the report, and then will also be provided to the select board in a presentation. We are also looking to you to provide feedback, which is why we have you here today. Thank you for coming. And we will summarize the feedback that we received from the community in that report as well. Okay. So here's a high-level arc of what we are doing. You can see that right now we're still in the midst of our data gathering mode, as well as our outreach, where we are talking to staff, we're talking to boards, committees, and you. And upcoming in August, we'll start our analyses. And then, of course, in order to make sure that this is able to affect our FY25 budget, we have to get things out before that budget is really underway, so that means early October. So we'll provide a report first, then we will go to the select board and present our findings. The public obviously will also be listening and commenting, and if there are any updates to the report warranted, we will then update those as well in October. Okay, next. So really these next steps, these are the dates associated with the activities that I just showed on the prior chart. They're important because if you want to follow what we're doing, here's the dates where you can, witness what we're doing and provide comments if needed. But I won't walk through each of them, but do know that they are on our website, and you can find this presentation on our website and find these dates.
Can I just add one thing onto there too? About just a reminder about our regularly scheduled meetings, that those are available to the public and are posted, and also the recordings can be found of both the whole committee and of our subcommittee on the Budget Task Force website. So just another point, these aren't the only opportunities to follow. Our regular meetings are open and public and available as well.
Yeah, good point, thanks. All right.
So I think we're going to transition to the open forum, but one thing I just wanted to mention, just to give you a flavor of this. So Erica talked about these scenarios. So we will go back to the three boards that chartered this committee and have a range of things that we'll propose. So we'll have to have one at least that says if we have to meet these budget constraints and we have no new revenue source, here's the kind of trade-offs we'd have to make, here's the kind of cuts in service that we think would be least painful. So we're going to have at least one example that says, if we're not able to raise any additional funding, this is what the consequence would be, and we'll spell that out in as much detail as we can to try to give people an understanding of that. We'll probably also paint a scenario where we decide that we do need to go to the public and look for additional funding. And then we'll have a couple options in between where we'll say, you know, here's something that we could do that would be a partially address this but still have some cuts. Here's another version which might give more services and have fewer cuts. So we're not going to recommend one of those over the other. That'll be the job of the committees that have charted this, but that will be something in the report, will be to give people a sense across the range of what consequences we might face depending on what choices we make as a community. So this is a great time for you to ask any questions you have. Thank you for being here. We'll also be looking for the folks online for any questions. Erica's going to leave this section, and I may actually look at some of the online things we've already gotten and ask those in front of this group, just so we're capturing those another way too.
So this is the open forum portion of our meeting. We are hoping to hear from you. These questions are suggested prompts, but they are not intended to limit you in any way. We are here to hear what you have to say. Please provide comments, questions, concerns, advice, knowledge that we might not be aware of. Whatever you have to say, we are here to listen. The mic is open. Thank you.
And again, if you're attending online, if you could use the raise hand function, that would be really helpful, and we'll monitor that as well.
We'll do name and address.
Yes. I'm sorry, you mean at the mic?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Dennis, please.
My name is Dennis Galvin. I am a resident, 90 Concord Road. I'm a member of the Finance Committee, and I was a member of the Planning Board for about 12 years. And I have an odd hobby that I like, and it's following Massachusetts state government. I watch the budget very carefully, and I have, and I think I'd like to offer you some starting points. So the first thing that I would suggest that you do is, when you begin to look at these towns, the towns in your market basket, pay attention to the per capita income, not the median income. The per capita income gives you a better idea of what the actual income distribution around that particular community is. For example, back in 2017, there was a comparison involving Wellesley and Westford. And Wellesley's per capita income was like 80. Westford was at that time about 50. I'm not sure what it is now. But that indicates that while you have a lot of people that can spike that bubble up, you also have a lot of people who are not in that same category. So that if you're going to hit them with any kind of a tax increase or a fee, there's going to be some pain. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing is that you just made a very good statement, Eric, when you said we don't have any control over certain things. And it reminds me, I think it was the psychologist Carl Jung who said, the first step to madness is the feeling of no control. So I would just keep that in mind when keep that in mind when you're thinking about this. So remember this. Number one, we're hitting our taxpayers with several things. We've had several debt exclusions. We've had water rates that are going to be increasing. We've had the stormwater fees. We've had the assessments. This is in addition to whatever Proposition 2.5 is. The value of the property goes up. People get higher assessments, and there's a lot of people feeling pain over that. And then there's also the possibility of an override. These are going to hit the town, and there's three particular groups that we should consider, but everybody, but three particular groups are going to get hit. Number one is families with children is going to be number one. They're stretched already. Number two is going to be fixed income folks like myself. Okay, that's where it goes. And the third one is businesses. And businesses are important because if you get to the point where you tax the businesses at too high a rate and you lose them, you lose that block of revenue that goes out with them. And then you're in a worse bind than you were when you started. So that's important. And the other thing that's of concern is that, and as I've said, the state of Massachusetts has been expanding its budget consistently at about 3% a year. I can remember clearly in 2004, the state budget was $26 billion. Right now, it's pushing $55, $56 billion. you can, unless there's a significant change on Beacon Hill, you can anticipate that that's going to continue to grow. And that's going to have a problem on us, because as that budget grows, we seem to be getting less and less local aid, which is a major issue. All right, that really hurts us. So as you look at these things, and you got a hard job, there's no question. Certainly the Finance Committee, I think, is very attuned to what's going on, and we'll try to do the best we can to try to assert it. But I would offer you two things. Number one, I think somebody mentioned the ambulance fees. The ambulance fees drive the fire department budget. I'm on the Finance Committee, and my area of oversight is public safety. And to cover off the ambulance, the fire department has to put more people on duty. And so when they do that, particularly it drives the overtime costs up, because they need to have a minimum manning to be able to keep the ambulance and the fire apparatus able to be serviced. So one of the things you want to remember is, maybe it's time to look at a privatization of the ambulance service. That's just a suggestion. I'm not saying we do it, but certainly you wouldn't be doing due diligence if you didn't. And the last thing I would recommend, and it's sort of a radical approach for Massachusetts, but it's pretty much acceptable in most parts of the other country. It may be coming time to come home roost here, is that as this state budget swells and swells and swells, and the state and our revenue shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, it may be time for us to at least make an overture to some bordering towns to start talking about regionalization in certain functions. I've had some experience with regionalization in public safety, but there's other ways that you can do it. And I think if you don't address, if you were to hit people with a tax increase and you didn't have some assurance that you're examining long-term regionalization, I think people are going to think that they're getting taken advantage of. So those are the things I'd leave you with, and God bless you for what you're doing, because it's a tough job. Thank you.
Dennis, before you leave, is there any further questions? He provided us a whole lot of information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over many years.
I believe that. Do you have any recommendations that you would see regionalization being a particularly
Yeah, I do.
option?
I do believe that public safety can be regionalized. I think just stop and think of it from the point of view of take 3 towns. Just take any 3 towns you want: Groton, Littleton, whatever. Right? You look at their facilities. There's 3 large buildings that are involved with having upkeep, heat. Each of them has their own upper management infrastructure, and also for police officers, we have some time to time we have issues with like retention. People come for a while, then they go someplace else because there's a lack of opportunity for them. So one of the things that you could accomplish by looking at that would be possibly to collapse the capital structure, really make it efficient, so that one station could handle 3 towns, right? Which is not an unreasonable thing to do, right? Second thing is you could maybe collapse the rank structure, so you won't have to be paying big salaries for captains and deputy chiefs and things like that. That would collapse down and help you out a little bit. And then the other thing you would be able to do is you'd be able to get retention from your officers a little bit better, because now they've got potential opportunities to stay here. So you don't have this turnover, which I think costs a lot of money, because every time you need to hire a new officer, you have to go and train him or her, which I think is the tune of about $17,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you'd know, Dan, right? What it costs to train an officer at the MPTC or something like that.
Yeah, it's in the ballpark about that.
Yeah, about that. So and every time we lose a person in the department, that has to be paid for. You're on the hook for another $17,000. So you want to kind of make that stabilize that a little bit. And those are some of the ways that I would look at it. These other things, I'll be thinking about them just like everybody else, but those have been on my mind for quite a while. So I just wanted to share them with you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah, that was great. Anyone else?
And I still don't see any hands for online, so.
Just for those people who are good enough to submit online suggestions, and please continue to do that. We do read those carefully. a number of questions asked basically for a sort of 50,000-foot perspective on how has Westford made allocation and spending choices between schools and municipalities? How's that trended over time? So that will be something that shows up in the analysis, just to give people a sense of, you know, what has happened in the allocation between them, how have they shifted. We'll go through some of the facts like per pupil spending that people often ask about. So there'll be plenty in there about that, just to help orient people about where we sit today, and then we'll all decide together where we want to go next. Were there other things in the online questions that just are worth mentioning again? There also were a number of suggestions about sort of particular things that people were interested in, things they valued in terms of services. Again, we're not going to be making those trade-offs here, but we can certainly collect them and pass them on to the elected bodies that will be making those decisions. So if you find one service particularly valuable and you don't find another service particularly valuable to you, please go ahead and share that, and we'll pass that on to the boards that will make that consideration.
So Amy has been diligently taking notes on Dennis's suggestions, and we agreed earlier that we would summarize to the public what we heard from the public. So Amy, if you would.
Sure. Is there anything else anybody wanted to add? Or wonderful. Well,
Did you have something?
if you, absolutely.
Yeah, please.
Yes, please.
State your
sorry.
name and your
Sorry.
address.
Just a question about Jackie Cuniff, 5 Tabmuck Road. When will you sort of summarize all of the survey responses and present? Will that be part of the final report? Is that?
It will be part of the final report, that summary. As to before that, we haven't really determined that there would be a particular time that we would do that.
Okay.
It's possible, but there's no determination of
Okay.
that.
Okay. Thank you. That's just the question. Lingering question. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.
We haven't decided this yet as a group, but I think we may have some sort of simple, high-level, sort of a little bit more explanation than this for the town retreat, which is a Kimball's. It's called the Kimball's event, if you don't think of it as the town retreat. But we will be gathering small groups at that meeting. We'll probably all split up and take a table of people and just explain the situation, get people's input, and just try to get as much input as we can in that event. So another chance for us to get input.
Yeah. I mean, again, we are all here. We're stakeholders. We are both citizens and employees of Westford. We have a vested interest in making sure that this goes as best it can, right? So we are very much trying to make sure that we are doing what will help everyone involved, please the most people.
So we do have a comment from Lynn Cohen. Thank you, Lynn. She asked that we remind people that while the town manager, select board, school committee draft the budget, it's actually the town meeting that has the authority to decide. That is the deciding authority. So exactly right. This group can present some options, some puzzle pieces. Those boards will actually prepare something to present to the public, and then it's a town meeting that you, the voter, actually will vote and make the final decision about how we allocate a resource.
Anyone else? Anyone online?
I don't have anyone online.
All right.
Everybody's being shy, or they have already submitted their comments to
But
us.
we did have Lynn, so
I
thank you
think
for
you're all
that.
just very thorough.
Oh, that's probably. Well, so this is before we wrap up and go to Amy's summary. So again, this is a process. You know where to find us. You can access it through the town the budget task force webpage. Any of the individual committees, any of the individuals you see here at the town retreat. We're doing a couple of updates in public session with the school committee, finance committee, and select board. So there'll be, 10 or 12 public events that people can plug into over the next couple months, 10 weeks or so, until we've got this report complete.
I mean, I think, Tom, you said this, but I'm going to reiterate again. We held this forum tonight, and we've been continually trying to do public outreach because we want to hear as early in the process as possible what are the things that people want to see in this report. What are revenue opportunities that you want to make sure we researched? And so we're trying to really gather that up now because our timeline is really tight. And everybody in this committee has been doing a lot of work to do the research, especially the benchmarking and efficiencies. Looking through those budgets I'm glad I'm on the revenue subcommittee because they've been really working hard, looking at all the line items, and it's challenging, and we just want to try to capture everything the public is hoping to see as early in the process as possible, so that we can try to deliver as much of that as possible in the final product. So again, there's the online forum, the online form that you can submit your suggestions to us, plus, as Tom mentioned, sending something through the website or whatnot. We are trying to hear, we want to hear, and make sure that the final output is what everyone was hoping for. At least in the content, maybe not in the recommendations. But.
As best we can. Thank you all for coming. It's been
Great.
Okay.
Should we have, yeah.
Sure, I'll do a quick recap. Thank you again. I think we've all been really in close with this, so it's wonderful to have somebody outside, right? It's very refreshing. So just to wrap up what I've heard today is something to make sure that is contained in the report, and the revenue opportunities, what that complexity is, and if that's within our control, and do we need state or federal input. So those are some considerations to include and to examine. Additionally, when we're looking at our market basket communities, looking at per capita income versus medium income, so that we really have a good comparison of what our communities can manage. Understand what our increases have been as of late. Some of our water and stormwater fees, our assessments have gone up. Some of those overrides, and those groups that are going to be most impacted by anything that is increased would be our families with children, fixed income folks, and businesses, and how much we rely on them for their revenue. Things to look at, you talked a little bit about the ambulance fees, and how much that does impact the fire department, which is a great point. And so the privatization, maybe considering some of that. The shared services, I like to call it that, or regionalization, right? Look at that as a long-term opportunity, as that may take some time to look into, but certainly really helpful information. Did I miss anything? Wonderful.
That's great. So before we adjourn, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us online. If you know people that would be interested in this, it's just a short 52-minute run through what we're doing. You can recommend that they watch the video on the website, which will be up there soon. Thank you, WestfordCAT, for that. And I also just want to thank members serving on this committee. This has been a really great committee to work with, and everyone's been working really hard. And so it's been delightful to meet those of you I didn't have a chance to know before. So thank you for that. And with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.